Just for the sake of being on time, we will start now. So welcome to the second panel of Encore Industry Day. We have four professors come entrepreneurs over here. I think three of them have been around and given talk, and we have heard their introduction. Arun is joining us now, who is our very own professor in the same building that we are. My first question would, like, I sent you guys a list of like 3 or 4 questions. So I'll sort of follow, like at the beginning, I'll just try to follow those questions, and then hopefully we'll go somewhere off the path and like end up at a random point, I guess. The first thing that I thought, like, this is, as opposed to the previous session on AI safety, this is more like an information panel as opposed to being a discussion panel. And what we will try to do is to learn from these people, like what motivates them to build a company, run it, being academics, and what is the process of doing that, right? So in this vein, I just like, we'll just go in any order and want to learn like what actually being academics, all of you are professors slash ex-professors, what really motivated you to start a company? Like what stage of your career that happened? I think Yaron has addressed that a little bit during his talk. But was there a point where you want to know, you know that this is a tech that I know enough about to start something, and this I will be useful more in that way rather than publishing papers or writing grants? Yeah, so when did that happen? You can go in any order. Yeah, I think you remember the first time.
Yeah, so the first company I started was Conviva. This was 2006, and it was when it was a time to take sabbatical or industrial leave, and post tenure. So and that was, the company was supposed to solve this kind of video distribution problem in the internet, real-time video distribution, which was assumed to be a big problem back then. And it was, trying to have more impact with the research I've been doing at that time. The second one was Databricks 2013, and that was based on this open source software, Matei and others, and we developed at Berkeley, and it was quite successful. And that was, the driver there was that, more and more companies were starting to use Spark, and they were asking about what is the future of Spark. They wanted to bet on Spark, but what happens when the students or they are going to graduate? And actually, in that case, we even wanted to talk with one of these Hadoop companies to whether they want to support the project going forward. They had other plans because they have their internal developments. And then we decided to start a company. It was also aligned with the timing. I could take another industrial leave and things like that. And other people like Matei was graduating, getting a job. He could take some time before joining, at that time, MIT. And the last company, it was Anyscale. It was, again, is like very similar with Spark, array problem scaling, AI workloads, end to end. And yeah, similar things about trying to go to the next level in making the open source popular and really solve the problems it was intended to, or at least we thought was intended to.
Oh yeah, so this is actually the first company that together with our co-founder we are trying to build. It's just like right after my so like this is my sabbatical year. Yeah. So
year is the key.
yeah, yeah. So like in the last 10 years, we have been working on essentially machine learning systems, like how to distribute the training, how to compress communications. I think one of the trigger point was we were kind of pretty shocked how expensive infrastructure was. And we have the feeling that potentially we could optimize that kind of significantly. So I think that was a trigger. And over time, we start to look at training, look at inference, look at like like lower level, right? So how can we orchestrate jobs like cross GPUs? Yeah, so that's how it gets started.
Do you think that being being in Bay Area in Berkeley, that has influenced you starting multiple times? Or like, would you be doing the same thing if you were, I don't know, in a different place?
It's a question for me.
Yeah, I'm just continuing, and then I will move on to. other
I think being in Bay Area certainly helped. I think that all these labs at Berkeley I was in part of, most of the funding was coming from industry actually. Now, this being said, just to make sure that in all these labs, all the software which was created was open source, and we didn't file for any patents, so everything we done was public, which makes things easier. Right? The open source actually makes it significantly easier to bridge the entrepreneurial things with university because it's open source. And if you don't have patents, then also makes things easier, right? So that's kind of, I really, I think is pretty enjoyable experience, at least the company being based on the open source. But yeah, it helps because you have the entire ecosystem support, and I think that many of these companies here are rooted in also Bay Area, right? And
So you don't have to relocate somewhere, I guess, for one thing.
I mean, yeah, it will be harder. I never thought about that. So it's a good question. I mean, I never thought about how it would have been to start a company elsewhere.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer.
Arun, what is your story? I mean, since we are going serially, kind of, I just.
Okay, that's fine. I can go. So yeah, so I started the company earlier this year. So we're still pre-product, not just pre-revenue. These guys are way ahead of us. What motivated me to start the company? Jan knows this. I've talked with him about motivations for academics and the process and stuff. Really, after I got tenured, I thought about what path do I want to take my research into, and the open source path was one path. And I realized, like being in San Diego, you need to get a lot more funding to be able to build a giant system, and you need to get cyber infrastructure grants from NSF, for example. Regular core research grants fund PhD students primarily for research, product development, getting software engineers that are professional scale, that are industry quality. I thought, okay, this sounds like doing a startup. Why would I do a startup within academia? I might as well do a startup the proper way. And so then I started talking to VCs, started talking to a bunch of other ex-academic founders, and two of my ex-advisors are multiple time founders as well. Chris Ray shared with our ex-advisor. He's a VC himself now. He has his own venture studio, and he sold $200 million to Apple, his first company. Then he's done a bunch of other companies. He's part of Together too, right? He has $2 billion companies too now. And Jignesh, he sold 3 companies before. So I talked to a bunch of those, Sam Madden, TNG, Amit, Luis, a bunch of folks in the data and ML infrastructure space. And that motivated me. My students were also interested in doing a startup. And then eventually the market crash happened. Some of the students were no longer interested in startups, but one student still stuck with me, and then we are co-founders right now. And they're excited.
Critical mass of students for you, that, like, in your experience?
One superstar student is good enough to co-found a company. Ideally, you have a small handful of stellar students who are very committed to building it. But what I'm finding is one superstar student is good enough if you get a right team around you for everything else. Just you and your student is not enough, because we worked with the venture studio. I worked with Andrew Ng's venture studio. Andrew Ng, of course, everybody knows in the AI world, right? And so they help you find co-founders and other team members and stuff.
So, Yaron, you mentioned, I mean, some of us probably were not there during your talk, that you have been, like, you got this DARPA grant, and you, like, instead of renewal, you thought of, why don't we just go with this stuff? You want to add anything add anything to that story, um, or like, also can you get, is there like some funding from the agency, government agencies like DARPA or NSF to start this type of venture? Or do you have to rely on VCs and?
Sorry, what was the latter?
No, I think like, do you want to like, anyway, the question is basically the same, that what motivated you at that point, but you addressed that a little bit in your talk. So maybe you can tell a little bit more about this. What are the funding options? Like, are there options from like the government, like NSF, or how they fund some?
I don't know that there are like kind of options from I don't know, to be honest, like there are kind of NSF options or you know, kind of DARPA grants that are specific for startups. Like in general, like my perspective is that, you know, that would not be a good idea. You know, to if one is interested in building, you know, a startup or a company, I would not take you know, DARPA money or NSF money to start a company. You know, for various reasons that I can, you know, that I can talk about. But yeah, I think, you know, something to, you know, I think something that's important to mention is that, you know, I think that like kind of starting a company, you know, like, you know, you don't need to hear it from me, but like, there's if any of you have seen, there's like a great clip that came out, I think, maybe 6 months ago, where, you know, these guys from the, you know, this podcast called Acquired, they interview Jensen Huang from, you know, from NVIDIA, and they asked him like, well, you know, if you're like, say that you're now again 30 and blah, 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 you're staying with your friends at like a Denny's, like what company would you start? And he just tells them like, I wouldn't do it, right? It's just too hard, right? And I think that if, I think out of every founder probably very much sympathizes with that. I'm saying that to say that like, you know, when I think kind of, I don't know how Jan did it like 3 times now, but like, I think when you, I think kind of really, you know, when you start a company, you do it because like, you're just too stupid to like kind of realize what you're getting into. And you sort of think, oh, this is going to be great. This is like, you know, like a faster way of getting money for like, who needs DARPA, who needs this, who needs that. But you're signing up for like a very different thing. And, you know, you don't, you know, even though people tell you, I think it's like, you know, I don't know, like how much you internalize it. So I think it's like, I would just sort of, you know, I think what people need to understand is that it's not a just like kind of a faster way of doing research, like kind of with you know, with faster money. It's you know, it's a pretty formidable kind of commitment, and you take on a role that is like very different from you know, what you do when you're, I think when you're faculty. So not to say that there aren't kind of qualities in, you know, in academics that, you know, that are, you know, advantageous, I think, to you know, to starting a company, but I think it is like kind of a very different job. So this is something that people need to be aware of.
Do you think that your academic background helped, or that hindered your?
I don't think it's the, you know, like, I don't think that academic, like, to be honest, like, I don't know that like an academic background helps, but I think it's like, you know, the qualities that, you know, if you kind of survive the Harvard tenure process, you know, then you can like, you know, selling a company to Cisco is easy. You know, so, you know, I'm half kidding, but I think like, yeah, or 10% kidding, but I think, you know, what it is, I think it's like kind of the qualities that, you know, if you were stupid enough to go to grad school and you know, you're stupid enough to graduate, and you're kind of like you kind of you're stupid enough to like, you know, kind of get to this entire kind of tenure process, you know, you're probably stupid enough to start a company and you know, and get to like a, you know, good outcome. So I think it's like, you know, it's the qualities that, you know, we're you know, that I think it's the inherent qualities that that I think people in academia have, that, you know, not a lot of people outside of academia, you know, appreciate. I think there's a lot of, you know, I think that, you know, academia is a great, you know, sort of a great exercise in, you know, humility and you know, and kind of dealing with, obviously rejections and, stress and, like kind of some form of, like kind of management and, kind of like you need to kind of encourage yourself, you need to collaborate. There are all these sort of qualities that if you don't have them, then you'll probably won't make it for a successful academic. And I think that good founders like probably, exhibit these kinds of qualities.
Yeah, just one thing to add. I did explore different routes. So NSF does have something that is seed funding for startups. It's called SBTR and I think SBIR, or something like that. $1 million renewable for second year for another $1 million. But the competition is very high. I think it's, again, 10% acceptance rates, like core grants. It's non-dilutive funding. They don't take any equity. You keep all the IP with the company, but it's not for pure product development. It's for R&D. So translational of research to product development, you still need to do some research. That program apparently is, there's a 6-month lag to get the grant, but then there's another 3-month period of intense work where you get to do customer discovery. They will put you in touch with 100 potential customers. You'll be doing a huge number of interviews. There's a cohort of activities, blah, blah, blah. I forget. Some faculty have gone through it. I looked at it and I said, no, we are far too advanced for that, because that takes a whole year to even conceptualize and get started. Some other faculty I know in CS have done that. I don't know how it went for them. It's very common in non-software fields. So like biotech and other engineering fields, they do take that NSF seed money. And I've seen success stories from that, electronics and stuff like that. But software, it's just a very fast moving world. NSF is super slow for that.
Is there any catch? Like you can, I think anyway, I think all of you are saying like these are all open source or something, but does NSF funded thing has to be open source or something?
So the catch is anything that is, you don't need to open source everything. I mean, you can file for a patent and get the patent license from the university. And again, in the non-software world, it's very common. Bioengineering, electronics, even here, we have an OIC, Office of Innovation and Commercialization. A lot of these startups that are hardware-oriented, engineering, biomedicine, they all license the patent from the university. They have an IP sharing agreement. I guess in the software world, VCs frown upon that because it slows things down. You have to share revenue, that sort of thing. That's sort of what I found out. Even with open source projects, there's always a question about moat. VCs always worry about moat, which is, well, how is your technology defensible? What if the hyperscalers take your open source project and sell it on the cloud for dirt cheap rates? How are you going to be able to monetize your product? What is your differentiation? That is the moat question. Like, will you be adding additional technological capabilities that are unique? What is your patent strategy? These are all sort of questions that will arise with an open source project. I don't know, Jan, how did you deal with that?
Want to add something to that? Or?
Oh, maybe next question I can have.
Well, I mean, just continuing, like, what exactly is the path to start this thing? Like, I think, suppose you have some idea and you have this superstar student or a cohort of students who are dedicated and who wants to do this thing. And so you talk with a lot of people. I guess that's one of the things, who knows stuff. But like, suppose now you are that group of people that we got got over here. So what would be the steps? Like,
You mean the next step once you decide that you want
once
to?
you decide, suppose I have my sabbatical year and I have this bunch of students or one great student, and I have this neat idea, and I think this will be, this will be a hit. So what should I do?
I think in general, it's great, of course, to have a group of students, and it's great to have already a project you're working on you want to take it to the next level. That's kind of more ideal because you can bootstrap. It's hard to start from zero because things takes time. And your sabbatical is what it's for industry leave. It's up to 2 years, right? It's not, which is extremely short. Obviously that one, even for yourself and exercise, you need to put the pitch deck, right? What is the business model, where you are going to, win, as everyone knows, vast majority of startups fail, right? You basically try to raise money. I mean, it's depending. It's everyone is going through that process. The question is how you raise money. It's like in some fields, like it's not as hard to raise money. Like AI, for instance, now, or in internet in 2000 or whatever. Then, you need to pitch it, but it takes a few months, even if everything works perfect, right? You need to decide which investors, valuation, all of this stuff, right? But I think, it's a process you have to go through.
You just said that vast majority of startups fail. So what do you consider a failure? Like, is it like like, I think a lot of them would be unable to raise funds. And then if they raise funds, then they are like, when do you think that it's a successful startup? Like, or
I think success startup, we should, I think, return to the original investors probably at some multiplier, right? That's kind of one definition, right? If the startup was has received external money, right? That's kind of one definition.
Yeah, so I think for me personally, actually, I think the process started way earlier. So it's not like I have an idea, I want to do something. It's actually start before I have an idea, right? So I think one reason that Together is successful is it's not really my idea, right? So it's a really more kind of collaborative process, right? So like in the beginning, I think I start from, I kind of want to do something, right? So, and the problem is I have no idea. I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what's a good idea. I know there's a few nuggets technically that I know a little bit about, right? So, and one thing that I learned in academia is you can always ask for help, right? You can ask people who you trust and ask their opinion about, yeah, what should I do, right? So that's also how we assemble the initial group of people, right? So, and collectively, right, we kind of start to refine the idea, start to get the company started, right? So I think, yeah, for me, that's kind of the process.
So what's like Arun and Yaron, like, I think now you've said that there is intent to acquire Yaron for your case of reverse intelligence. Like, what is the end game of, like, for you or someone, like, or anyone of doing this thing? Like, you, when you do this thing, do you have this in mind? I want to get acquired by someone, or like, do you want to really become something else? So what exactly are you expecting when you're doing this? I think, again, in any order.
I think, I guess you sort of hope to not fail, right? I think that's the biggest part, which I think I agree with Jan's definition of not failing is, being able to return a multiple to the investors that is, better than what they would have gotten, had they, put their money in the S&P 500, right? So I think to me, that's that's a good definition. Yeah, I think that's kind of like the, I think that's kind of probably the sort of maybe the financial definition or the kind of logical definition. But, I think for, especially I'm assuming for people in this room, we're sort of like acting on a, kind of like, I think that we're mission driven, so, I think that I think that we're getting, I think that investors are going to be very, I think the investors are very happy with the outcome that we have. But I wouldn't have been happy with the outcome, irrespective of, the financial outcome, had it not been for, for kind of like an alignment with the mission of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Because like, you're putting in, like really the best, some would argue, I don't know if it's the best years of your life, but you're putting in, those are already gone, unfortunately. But you're putting in like kind of good years of your life into, well, it's the truth. You're putting in good years of your life, and I think more importantly of other people's lives, right? Into to do something. I think that if all of us were financially interested, we would probably choose other professions, right? I think that all of us are here because I believe that we're mission driven. So if you end up with a good financial outcome, but but you sort of, you say to yourself, I spent 5 years, spent 10 years like doing this, and now, okay, like I got rich, or my investors got rich, and but like they threw my product to the to the garbage can, or like I'm not really gonna have the impact, or do the things that I set out to do. I personally would not consider that as a success, right? So I think that's the kind of like the biggest thing, and I think that's this is where it kind of goes back to kind of like first principle thinking, like why are we here? Why are we doing this? So that's kind of my perspective.
Just a couple of things regarding when to start. Back to that question. Don't wait till your sabbatical. I mean, as mentioned, you have to have things lined up before. Don't waste your sabbatical time on trying to explore how to start a company. Use your sabbatical time to be full-time with the startup. That's what I'm doing. So you have your consulting time 1 day a week. You can use that to work with whatever. But you can also do informal chats without getting paid. That is totally acceptable. Be mindful of conflict of interest issues. So you can't use university time and resources for for-profit endeavors, including doing startup stuff. Most universities give only up to 2 years of leave. If you're very, very lucky, very, very rare, then they'll give you a 3rd year of leave. After that, they will ask you to leave. And I've seen a lot of my friends leave academia because of that. That's sad. UW, Arizona State, bunch of folks. I wish that didn't happen. I wish we had more of this academia industry bridge, but it is sad. So your time is very precious. The time that you're on leave from the university is very precious. And in terms of starting companies, most universities, big universities like us here and also many others, have incubators, accelerators. They have an organized program where a bunch of professional people can help you with things. Like I, for example, took an entrepreneurship course with the UCSD Extension 2 years ago. And that was taught by one of the original investors of Zoom. And so we have some great people at most of these universities. That'll give you a feel for what it's like long before you're actually on sabbatical. And you can start conversations with VCs also. Nowadays, VCs are far more numerous than a decade ago. And they will be very happy to take a call and then chat about. The industry nowadays also has this venture studio process that I told you about. So AI Fund is one that's headed by Andrew Ng. Chris Ray has one called Factory HQ. There's some more. These are basically in between a venture firm and an incubator accelerator. They both incubate you and they give you your initial pre-seed money, but they take a big equity cut. So it depends on which venture studio you work with. If you're comfortable with giving up equity, then you can consider that as an intermediate option. If you go directly to VCs, you keep more of your equity, but that's far harder. And universities generally don't take equity for their incubation process. Some might. So I think the ecosystem has become much more mature, especially in California, New York, Seattle, some of these big cities in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world, but in the US, startup ecosystem has become much more mature. With public clouds, it's very easy to get started. Software startup is the easiest thing to get started compared to hardware startups or medical startups, because you just rent, and all these hyperscalers give you free credits as well. Like we got a whole bunch of free credits from AWS, and that helps you get started very quickly.
Well, on that note, I just want to say one thing. Like everybody here is saying, like 2 years, you have 2 years. I would advise everybody to read the manual, because I didn't, and apparently Harvard only gives you 1 year to be outside the classroom. So I found out at the end of my first year that they only have 1 year, which is kind of funny. I still took 2, but apparently you're only allowed to take 1. So just be aware of that. That's all.
So is there like for students or postdocs, like grad students or postdocs, is there like a very compelling reason to go with one of the startups and like partner with their professors or with friends to explore this? Because how viable it is, because it seems like you know, you are a grad student, you either join one of the big tech or other tech, and or you do a postdoc and go to a faculty member, which is like the more usual thing a lot of people are doing. You will be sort of doing things with the flow. And then, so what would be, you know, an incentive to do this thing? Why would they want to do this? Again, any order, like beyond, you want to?
So let me say that it's again, it's like, if you when you start your graduate school, if you are thinking that very likely you are going to go and start a company, you should think twice about doing the PhD. It's not the most optimal path to start a company. Because of course you are going to learn a lot, you are going to see a lot of projects, maybe you are going to start the project, you're going to turn into a company, but there is a 5 or 6 years opportunity, right? Gap, so loss. Now, when I think that, when you are a student, right, and you want to go and, like decide to start a company, why would you start? I think that what I've seen is about because you want to take, your project, you are very passionate and to take to the next level. And you think that that's a way to have the biggest impact. I do think that people who start company, irrespective whether they're students or PhD students or postdoctoral students or others, they should start a company only if, I think, there are exceptions. But if you are passionate about a problem you want to solve, right? Don't do it only for the sake of it, right? Because it's hard, like Joran said. So I think this is what you're saying, is that, you are passionate about the problem. You have done something during your PhD to make inroads, progress in solving that problem. But then now you want to take it to the next level, and you believe that as a startup, which is built around solving that problem, you have the best chance to solve that problem.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think for grad students, in terms of like not necessarily starting a startup, but like kind of joining a startup, I think that there's a lot of compelling reasons. First of all, for anybody who's interested in, in startups, anybody who's interested in maybe one day running a startup or just sort of like understanding kind of what it's like, then it's a massive learning opportunity, right? You sort of like, you see a company in its formation and how it's growing. You kind of like, you see the different roles, you see kind of all these different functions that, that are related to a company that I think are really exciting. I think, it's probably the best business school that anybody can ever get. It's like, I think I've never done an MBA, I probably never will. But I think it's, you learn the most valuable lessons about business, kind of in just being in a company, just being, even if you're, quote unquote, just an engineer, you're probably going to get involved with customers and sales. You're probably going to get exposed to a lot of those things. And I think also from a technical perspective, an engineering perspective, in my opinion, like kind of 1 year in a startup company is, in my opinion, probably equivalent to, I don't know if it's like 5 years at I can't, well, now I'm going to be part of a larger company, but probably 5 years at a large company, or, because basically you're just building everything from scratch, right? Like kind of, and again, in this room, we're very much kind of like first principle people. We know how much when you actually have to, like prove a theorem rather than like apply it, right? So you basically, if you've built that system, if you've kind of like experienced all the difficulties that it has, scaling it, kind of like serving it, all those things, you just learn way more than you ever will if you come into, a system that has been built for you for, been used for the past like 10 years. And now you just like put in a kind of like, been super optimized for people who are, not experts to use it. Right. So, so I think there's just like tremendous value on all fronts. So, to people, this is highly recommended.
One thing I would add is, although it is true that the experience is like 1 year at a startup is 5 years at a big tech, the pay is reverse. 1 year at a mega big tech company with your stock and your cash can be 5 years at a startup that is middling or not doing well. So there is an opportunity cost. So I would recommend students be mindful. I mean, again, this is free market capitalism. Decide based on what offers appeal to you, what factors appeal to you. In my own situation, I've seen both sides, right? Some students, and it also varies based on whether you're an international student or a domestic student. And even among international students, it varies based on whether you're an Indian and Chinese national or an other national. Because there are green card issues, H-1B issues, a lot of things. So a lot of factors at work. I was totally comfortable with the students saying no to coming to my startup because it is a tough market and a startup is a tiny company and who knows, it will be around in 3 years. International students want stability. And so that is totally okay. Other students who are international students, but they don't want to live in the US anymore. They want to go back after a few years. So they have this YOLO philosophy, go big or go home. So it varies quite a bit. And I think, yeah, I mean, basically for grad students, startup, as Yaron mentioned, gives you a very exciting opportunity. Whereas at many big tech companies, I see many people are cogs in a giant machine, and so they're bored. But even if you go to the right team, you might actually do exciting stuff. Like some of my former friends moved to DeepMind within Google because other teams were boring, and they moved to DeepMind and they had a lot of fun. So it is possible to move around in some of these giant companies. But other than that, apart from compensation in terms of cash, startup give you equity. And so if you find the right startup that is going to become big like these guys, your equity will become a lot of money later. There is a vesting period, typically 4 years. So you stick with the startup for at least 4 years, then you typically move. If you are very invested in the vision and the mission of the startup, like Jan was mentioning, you continue to grow up the leadership of the startup, and you can take up the leadership position in the startup. That's what a lot of these Databricks folks seem to have done, right? They're still there. And so because Databricks has become so big and successful, and I've seen that across multiple companies too. But I've also seen people leave after 4 years after they are vested because they're excited about something else now. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so I think from the student standpoint, all these factors come into play. They'll have to decide based on all these factors that matter to them. And again, it's a free market. I would recommend students not be taking decisions based on, oh, a former professor of mine started this, so I'm indebted to them. Don't think like that. This is a free market. Your company will choose to lay you off if they are in financial trouble. So you should think in terms of what is best for your metrics and your goals.
I want to say one thing about compensation, especially kind of like in the field of AI, where kind of we have kind of insane compensation, and unfortunately, I'm now kind of like also responsible for part of that. But I think kind of my perspective on this is like I'm actually kind of I want to kind of on a very personal note, my dad is turned 82 this year. And he published. My dad is a double E professor, and this year he also he published like a completely new paper on something like kind of very very new, and he kind of like, and I've seen him kind of like throughout the process of how he kind of like somebody approached him with a problem and how he solved it. He was like working like a like a first year grad student, kind of like writing all the paper, developing all the all the math behind it. He's like super excited about it. He's like giving talks and stuff. And he's not one of these kind of like career obsessed people. He just does it because he loves it. And one of the things I was kind of like when I'm looking at that, I'm reflecting on it. I'm like, gosh, I'm thinking, gosh, my dad has had an active career for the past for like 60 years, right? It's crazy, right? So when you're thinking about the fact that like, gosh, like and I wish myself that, and I wish and I wish all of us that. If you especially kind of when it's work that you find meaning in, it's like if you have a 60-year career ahead of you, then there's time to like get the big comp from from all these companies. Like that's not, in my opinion, with everything that I'm saying about AI, everything I'm saying about security, I think we famous last words, but I think we're going to be in business for some time. But the learning opportunities, they just become rarer and rarer as as you I'll say mature, right? So maybe this is like very cliche, but from my perspective, I would trade off kind of like learning and the experience, especially if these are kind of like once in a lifetime opportunities, and they are once in a lifetime opportunities. I would kind of trade those off like over compensation, anytime. And again, I think that all of us in this room have done that. Whether it's going to grad school, whether it's continuing in academia, whether it's all those things, I think that they're always kind of like more, lucrative options, right? But I think that, we're, as I said earlier, I think we're mission driven, and I think like kind of we're intellectually driven, and I think that we're, intrinsically kind of interested in like kind of learning and development. And I personally would, would hold off on compensation. And my belief is also that, it's also financially the right thing to do, because like that would pay off in dividends later on. That's my personal perspective.
Yeah, so personally, I think when made the decision myself, I was essentially trying to minimize the regret. I was really thinking about if I do not do that, how regret I would be. I would be really regret. Yeah, so I don't know how hard it is, but back then I was thinking, I have really regretted if this is my only chance for this small technical knack that I know can be useful. If I do not do this, I would regret a lot. So that's literally the only thing I was thinking about back then. And then everyone will have different factor to factor in about what they cares about, right? But I think, yeah, at least personally, that's what happened, yeah, for me.
So I do have one more question, but I also want to know from the audience if there is any question that you want to ask this panel. Okay, see, Sujay, and then
Yeah, so in your journey when you started a company, there seems to be this trade-off between focusing on making like a really good product that you believe in, and focusing on your like first few customers that you your first customer. And your first customer may not even want the product you sell off, or maybe they want to like 50% of it. And you kind of have to somehow navigate this thing of like, do you build what you believe in, or do you build, do you build what your current customer wants, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and that's why my advice is to focus on the problem, right? So, because if you focus on the problem, things will follow more naturally. So first of all, you think this is a problem I'm going to focus on, and you believe in the problem because you think that the problem other people do, or other people have, right? That's how you want to solve it, right? You want to have an impact, right? So you want to make the life of some people easier, right? So now, if the customers tells you that, oh, I don't have this problem, and you don't find the customer with that problem, then it's like the problem is going to shift, right? Maybe it's not what this is a problem, that's a real problem, right? Need to solve. And then everything will follow. But the other way around, if that's why you have to believe in the problem you have to solve rather than the problem. My sense. And in some cases, it's like, you see, one thing about the open source, it's useful. Everyone talk about this product market fit, right? Now, with the open source, if the project is successful, it's almost like half of this product market fit is solved because the product is successful, because people use it, and people use it because it solves some problem. Right, so you have kind of a proof that it solves a problem. Now, the other half of the product market fit, these people should pay you for that, right? So that's kind of, but in some sense, if you start with from an open source, you do have this kind of settle a little bit the question you ask. But if you don't have, I think that just follow the problem.
Is that a follow-up of this? Yeah, please go.
So basically, again, guys, things are not very complicated. It's again, I'm usually saying things are not complicated, but they are hard, right? It's like differentiate between complicated and simple or hard. So for instance, when you started Databricks, at that time, you look about what are the most successful companies in the open source, it was Red Hat. The business model, what is a business model? It's open core and maybe some professional services. Also, Cloudera it's a mix between professional services and selling a product. And so the things about when we studied Databricks, we thought pretty hard about the business model. We talked with people around, and we decided to do as a service and only have a product. So you need to have a certain belief, to make some bets. By the way, in any startup, you have to make some bets, period. Because if you do not make some bets, this means that you do like everyone else is doing, right? You are going to get the biggest wins when you make a bet, which means you go a little bit contrary to the popular belief, and you are correct, right? If you are not correct, doesn't matter, right? It's like you are just a fool, right? Because everyone told you not to do it, right? So this is a fine trade. It's like so. So that's kind of what you need to do. So with the business model going open source monetizing on the cloud, it was a bet because Cloudera, for instance, they started in the cloud, they pivoted on that's Cloudera. That's a name we're saying, and then they were very successful selling on-prem, right? But again, it's a long discussion. So you need to make a bet, and that was a successful bet, and there are fundamental reasons why you thought it could be successful. But again, that's one way. But at the end of the day, if you think about if you have an open source, I think that the values people can pay for. If it's something distributed, is that going to pay something for managing it for them? They are going to pay to make, if you have some kind of, they are going to pay for professional services to help them, right? With that, they are going to be to pay a little bit for the risk, because if they are betting on an open source, they want to also have the people who created the open source to help them, right? If something wrong and so forth, it's kind of the risk. But ultimately, if you want to have a more scalable business model, you make that open source, if you do it in the cloud, running faster, cheaper, right? Because then it's aligned with consumption. And consumption-based pricing is where you want to go. It commands the highest multipliers, right, in terms of evaluation. So that's kind of how I would say. Or you can do it more secure, right? Okay, that's another angle, right? But performance and cost reduction are, because it's related with whatever TCO, it's a pretty good bet in general, right? But this means that also the depth of the stack, open source stack, it has to, you have to have some depth, because you need to ability to innovate within that stack. If it's too thin, it's hard, like Docker. You cannot play that game necessarily, or even Kubernetes, right? But with something like, say, Spark and Spark SQL, it's a lot of depth. So you can innovate and you can improve the performance and cost. And but again, this is what you need to find. One of these dimensions. You are going to differentiate from the open source.
It's hard to, like, Jan is a very tough act to follow when it comes to monetizing open source, but I'll just sort of give my perspective, obviously kind of like watching everything that Jan has done, from afar, and also, from, kind of like our decisions not to open source, and also kind of like there are several companies that spun out of Robust Intelligence, that are open source. But I think kind of the fundamentals, don't change. I think that, my personal opinion is that, open source, is rather than thinking about how do I monetize open source, you should really be thinking about, okay, I have open source software, and that gives me like some advantage over, somebody else. And the question is like, what is it that you're selling, and who is it you're selling to? And when I'm asking that, I mean that like in the most, you have to probably take like a few steps back to sort of think about like, what am I selling and who am I selling to? So for example, like for us, something that I think we realized kind of soon enough is that, it's not about, security that we're selling. Like nobody cares about like how we do it or what it is. The biggest thing that we realized that we're selling is, is basically allowing companies to adopt AI much faster. Right. And, and this is how you develop also these kind of like these meaningful relationships, like with the CIO of JPMC, or, the top levels at, at an insurance company, or this. They don't care about like the, what algorithms use. It's like there are people somewhere down the chain that do care about that. But if you want to secure, very large deals, what they care about goes back to what Jan said, is about solving a problem. And, for them, it's like, in our case, like, for them, the problem is that it's going to take them like 18 months to deploy AI. Because why? Because it's like, they don't trust it. It's it's like, it's insecure. It's this, it's that. They don't want to find themselves kind of like in the front page of the New York Times. Right. So it's like, that's what you're selling like a basically faster way of deploying, faster way of, in our case, faster way of deploying AI. In Jan's case is like, it's a great way of basically leveraging all this sort of like masses like of data that that you have in your organization, right? And doing it kind of efficiently. Those are the things that you're selling to people, and that's kind of what people end up paying for, right? They don't care how you do it. As long as you're kind of like able to do something meaningful, that's kind of what people will buy from you. So that's kind of how I tend to think about these things.
Any other response to Sujay's question? If not, I'll go to the second question. You had something, right?
I just wanted to know, like, what was the biggest challenge transitioning from
that because I'm still in the transition phase. Biggest challenge is multiple challenges. Startup life is extremely intense, and it depends on your level of commitment to the company. Like, I am only full-time to be CTO, co-founder, right? Some people are just advisors, or they have a giant team with them. So it varies based on your level of involvement and commitment. If assuming you're at the far end of highly committed, highly involved, it's very intense. And the challenges include things like your schedule will be very different. As an academic, you get to set your schedule. I can decide when I teach my course, when I meet with my students and stuff. But as a startup team, you have a team of people who are reporting to you. And so you have to work around the constraints of work hours, work constraints, labor laws, all of that stuff. On top of that, startup life is very intense. We have daily stand-ups, we have weekly engineering meeting and stuff. And as an academic, I would meet with my students only twice a week, once one-on-one, once with a group, occasionally ad hoc meetings. But here there's a lot more meetings. I don't think this has been as hectic. I've never seen, my life hasn't been this hectic since IIT JEE days in my high school, which is 20 years ago. Even assistant professor life is nothing compared to being a co-founder of a startup, because it's very intense. Financially, there'll be a lot of challenges because you're taking a pay. I took a pay cut because I'm getting paid mainly by equity. Raising money is always a huge challenge unless you have extremely fast growth and your product is flying off the shelves. Raising money is always a challenge. VCs always are very picky. Their market, the way they operate is supposed to be very picky. Hiring can also be a challenge sometimes. So far, we've had very good luck with hiring top-notch people. So these are all different kinds of challenges you'll have to grapple with at a startup. I don't know what else these folks faced.
Anyone wants to add more challenges?
I would get some different flavor because I've had a slightly different path. I chose not to do open source in anything. I filed patents on my software. And so the first company I did, we had no VCs. I turned them down. And very streaming video, so it was a little easier. But we had a product from day one. We could deliver video, anyone could see it on the internet. And so we got bought for $3 billion. And when they came and made an offer and they said, we don't care about anything. You have great customers, doesn't matter. You have these patents, we're dead. And so I know that's counter to a lot of people think patents don't matter in anything, but sometimes they do. And then my second company, I got bought for my patents also. That was Cartesian, and that was $20 billion. So I'm saying I wouldn't avoid patents. If you think you've actually discovered something, I would consider doing it.
I would avoid it like the plague. I would avoid patents like the plague. 100%.
So, yeah, so actually, every companies have been involved, they have their own patents.
Yeah.
Right? Also, they file patents, right? Because it's any of these companies, even if they are based on the open source, a large part of the engineering is working on non-open source part side, right? It's to add this value, add optimizations, add security, add availability, data governance, all of these things. So there is no question that they are going to do to patent. I was talking about, when I was talking about the open source, I was talking about in the, at the foundation, at the early stage. Of course, this is different from what you are saying, but to be very clear, I just wanted to make different. Yeah, it's what the journey you are telling about is different, right? From the open source and no patents. But the companies, it's not that they are anti-patents. They are all going to file patents, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I'm saying
I just wanted to make it clear. Yeah, I think like for us, for instance, at Berkeley in the project, we say this is a statue of the labs because we are funded from industry, also from different companies, and this actually makes it easier, right? Because if you file patents while you are funded of all these companies, then who is the patent belonging to? It's very complicated. So it's something else. It's a matter of practicality as well.
I think there are multiple elements to say it's when it works well.
There is one question, but I've been shown the time off board a few times already, but I will take that question like maybe for a quick comment.
What should prepare identify
Well, money does matter. You can't live for free, but it's not the primary motivation. What problem are you solving, like Zion mentioned? Sorry, the problem. Are you tackling a problem for which people want a solution? Is that a pain point that they're feeling? Is that something that is missing in the market? That is the first thing. Team is very critical. You don't want to found a company with people you don't like. It should be a team that gels well together, people complement each other, and they are force multipliers together. Financing also matters, and the nature of the financing also matters. If you end up getting money from people who are vultures, your life will be miserable. So get the financing from good people. And customers. You need to enjoy talking to customers. Startup life, the goal is to build a product that people want to adopt and pay for. It's not a research lab. So you need to have the ability to enjoy talking to real people about their problems. It could sound very mundane. It could sound very boring for someone who's done a PhD and a postdoc. But for us, we started the company because that really excited us. It also motivated our research originally. That's my take.
Yeah, just for the interest of time, I will end here. Any other question you can ask this panelist later on. Thanks a lot, everyone. It's great perspective. Not from you. I think we have one final talk.
Yes, we have one final talk, and after that we move again to the poster session.